Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Stammet, and I am Associate Professor and Chair of the Department of English here at Agnes Scott College. Welcome back to the 50th celebration of the Writers' Festival. As you know by now, this is the longest continuously running literary festival in the Southeast. And as we turn 50, we are over the moon to be welcoming back returning guests Rita Dove and Jacqueline Goldfinger, class of 2000. Later today at 4 o'clock, we are hosting a really interesting event. This is a round table with former winners of the Writers' Festival contest, which is moderated by Agnes Scott professor Camila Aisha Moon, herself a contest winner. And then at 8 o'clock, please join us for Rita Dove's reading and the announcement about this year's winners of the Writers' Festival contest. The complete list of events can be found at calendar.agnescott.edu, which I will put in the chat in a moment. And please take a look at Karis Books' virtual book booth, which has information about how to purchase some of the works featured this week. I will also put that link in the chat for you as well. You are here at the question and answer session, and it is one of my favorite events of the week, and I think that it's a department favorite as well. This rare opportunity to hear questions from audience members of these esteemed writers, and to hear the writers not only answer the questions, but to participate in conversations with one another and with us, is always inspiring. Following this section in particular, I always want to carve out moments for myself to go write because I feel myself bitten by the writing bug. So I'm going to recommend that for this event, rather than using the gallery view or even the speaker view, that you pin our distinguished writers. What that means is you are going to want to hover your cursor over the top right box of the people you'd like to pin. And when you click the little 3 dots, the ellipses box, you will have some options, including chat and rename, but pin. So we recommend pinning our distinguished guest today. Oops, I'm going to stop my screen share, which is better for everyone, and pass things over to Professor of English, Robert Meyer Lee, who is going to serve as our moderator for today. Bobby?
Hey, you all. It's great seeing your faces or your boxes, your names in one form or another. Thank you for coming out today or tuning in today as it is. I'm Bobby Meyer Lee. I teach here in the English department at Agnes Scott, and I normally have the easiest job of the Writers' Festival, which is to stand in cozy little Lexington lounge and look at all of you all and call on you when you raise your hand. I don't have to give introductions because our guests will have full introductions at their keynotes. Rita Dove tonight at 8 p.m. and Jacqueline Goldfinger tomorrow at 5. The purpose of this is to save as much time as we can to have you all ask questions and have our guests, our fabulous, wonderful, amazing guests, answer them. My job's a little more complicated, of course, on Zoom, and that means I have to somehow keep track of who's got a question and make sure everybody gets an opportunity. And I apologize in advance for my feeble Zoom skills and being able to do that. So what I will ask you to do is use the raise hand feature, which is in the reactions button on the lower right-hand part of the screen. And I will try to keep track of who is raised hands in the order you have. If you would really not rather speak, you may instead put a question into the chat, and I will try to keep track of that, or maybe Nicole can help me do that to make sure. But what often works instead better for the chat is that people just make rave reviews of what's being said as we're going through. So with that said, I will just turn it over to you all and look for the first question. Peggy.
Well, I didn't really think I was going to go first, but I waited. Great to see you, Jackie, and Miss Rita Dove. Great to see you. It's been 29 years since I introduced you.
Wow.
Wow, right. And what I said then was that I like to think of you as a young poet because you're my age. And I still like to think of you as a young poet for the same reason. But watching the video of that reading last night, I had to ask myself, what's going through your mind 29 years later? In terms of literature, culture, the world. I look at you then and I wonder, how have you changed? How has your work changed? What do you project in the future? That's a small question. You go with that one.
Just we can toss that one off, right? It's so wonderful to see you again, Maggie. You know, I would have said maybe about 5 or 6 years ago that what has changed has been just the natural course of being a writer. That I don't really know what has changed. When I did my collected poems, I was forced to go back and put it all together, and I thought, wow, I was really kind of bold and weird when I was young. Let's put it younger. And I don't know, but I'm going to leave that to others to say what's changed in the work. I do think that we've had such a radical change in the way we look at, in the way intimacy is projected now through our work because of social media, because of the advance of the internet. And then, of course, we have the pandemic, which did another kind of weird double back loop somersault on that. So what's going to happen in the future? I really don't know. And that excites me, actually. I mean, Jackie, how do you feel about that? You know, what's going to happen in the, because, yeah.
Yeah, I think we don't know, which is a place I like to be in, but that's because I'm also a playwright, and one of the fun things about theater is we often deal with the unknown. Sorry, I got caught up in your answer there for a minute, Ms. Dove, and I forgot that I was on the panel because the answer was so great. But one of the things that, at least in theater, I'd be curious to know if it's moving over into other forms, is that I feel like about 10 years ago, when social media really started to take off in a big, expansive way, and take different forms, there were a lot of plays that were just excited about the media, and so kind of threw social media onto the stage, mostly in ways that weren't particularly effective. But now, because we've had it for a while and we have this new generation of writers who's coming up who's lived with it, you know, I'm looking at social media plays that actually integrate and look at the emotional and social and spiritual impact of social media on people, and that work is so much more compelling. Kiara Hudes did amazing work to lay the foundation for that in Water by the Spoonful, which is the play she won the Pulitzer for. We owe a lot to her. But in terms of my work, I'm not quite sure where it's going, but I do think that in terms of over the course of theater in general, the art form in America, at least, it's going towards becoming much more penetrating and looking at the people who operate the social media rather than the flash of social media itself.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. I have no idea where my work is going. Because I've just started a new phase and I find that exciting. But I've just started recently in the past years being asked to write opera librettos. And so it's really been a very different way. I went back and revisited Rita Dove's work and work of other poets that I love, because they are so good at concisely creating these beautiful, beautiful, heartbreaking moments and a very small amount of text. And so for me personally, I'm excited to learn more about how to do that. And I love this idea that my writing is evolving into this new form where I'm learning how to kind of compress complex ideas into kind of less text with just as much impact and the addition of music. So that for me is a new journey for the future that I am excited about.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I've been doing a lot of, I have always been doing a lot of stuff with music because I played the cello and I sang, and that projection into another person's soul via the music, and so that the words and the music also enter one is it's really fascinating, and I love doing it. It's very different. It feels very different than writing a poem, actually, which I know it's going to be in a book. One of the differences I think is going to make I think it's going to change me, but I don't know, Jackie, is that I think that when most poets for a long time I did, you imagine that the work, if you're lucky, is going to be printed in a book. If somebody opens the book, the light that they shine on those words comes from usually over their shoulder. They enter it. They have to make the conscious decision to go into the light. Now, everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people are reading on screen and the light's coming at them. And there's a little more of a, it's not passivity, but it is that sense of waiting for the light to enter you. That's a different kind of relationship. It may be closer to theater, just in the sense that once one enters that room and the stage lights go up, but it's going to change me, and I don't know how. And I love that feeling, like you.
Something new, a new adventure.
Yes, yes.
I love.
Here we are.
You are so good. Like, you've worked with so many different forms of music. Have you found that there's a form that particularly suits or is particularly feels like home to you in terms of the music that you're working in the text for?
You know, I really love the song. I mean, the lead up. I mean, just it is about the size of most lyric poems. There is a sense of the words actually mattering, you know, more than they do often in opera, where, you know, you've got, you know, nobody understands the words, but you kind of get the drift. Yeah. And every once in a while, there's a word that hits a certain note and it just pierces your heart, but then the rest of the words, oh well. I really love the leader for what it does there, and the way in which silence plays a part in the leader. Just the pacing of it is similar to the kinds of silences or breaths that you get in poetry. That's all. What about you?
That's lovely. I have really found, so I've only written to bluegrass and opera music.
Wow.
So welcome to my weird life. I grew up in the rural South where there's a lot of bluegrass. I have put words to bluegrass music, and I've also put words to opera. And the thing that's the same about both of them is that no one's really listening to the fucking words in either of them, right? Like, it's very, the challenge of how do you, if you're interested in it, how do you create the narrative with knowing that people are primarily listening to the music? What are those individual words that need to pop to make sure that people feel like they're and both intellectually understand, but also feel the story within them, resonate within them, right?
Right.
And so I've become very, I have something I call keywords, and in the librettos that I go through and I highlight in orange highlighter. And at some point I have different people just read the list of keywords and see if they can get this, what happened overall in the story.
Yeah.
And if they can't, I change those keywords, because I know that from the music, those are the words people are going to actually understand the most. And I want to make sure that if audience members do want to follow the story, they can, just with those words. Ooh. So that's what I've learned to do, because just like you said, like, they're not going to hear every single word.
Yes, they're not. They're just
not.
Then, you know, if you come at it from the other side, as a singer, I know that singers often, they use those words. A really great singer will use the words to tell them how to move through the music, where to pause, how to turn a phrase. So those key words, and even the story that the audience may not get at the first thing, are really helpful to, I think, a great singer to know how to do that, to know how to, where to land, how to, you know, say that keyword, sing that keyword so that it breaks the heart.
How did you find, do you find that your musical
No, Jackie, I'm gonna interrupt you, not because it's not amazing.
I'm having so much fun.
What you're saying, but I'm realizing you two are gonna riff off each other amazingly this whole time. So I want to insert another question into the mix, and then let you all go with it again. So this is from a student, Maya Gelting, who posted in the chat. What advice do you wish you had been given when you started your career as a writer?
You know, the thing that I wish I had been, goodness, well, there's a lot of stuff, but the one that was most helpful but came later. I was in graduate school and I was already published and I was trying to work, and this came from a wonderful writer, Louise Gluck, who then said, you should write the way you live. Listen to your body. She said, write when you feel most alive, and everything else you can take care of, you know, with your other hand, so to speak. And I think up to that point, I thought there was a certain way to write. I was always asking writers, you know, how do you write, and trying to emulate their ways instead of listening to myself. And once I realized that I worked best at night, and I worked best in fragments, I worked best, you know, juggling lots of things, then it wasn't that it was easier to write, but it just felt righter to write, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Well, I think that's so important. So I want to double underline that everyone, just as the writing is unique, so is the artist. And so the idea of doing what you feel like you need for yourself is so important. And sometimes it's hard to take that ownership over your life. But it's so vitally important. And also, to add something new to it, don't be afraid to try new things. You may be good at it, you may not be good at it. It's not the point. The point is that you will evolve and grow and push yourself forward as a writer. I don't know if my opera librettos are any good. I mean, I'm having fun writing them. I love being in the room with singers and musicians and a composer. That's great. I love the fact that one of the things I've always loved about theater is that you're not alone. I love being in community with people to create. I'm having a great time. Librettos may be great. They may be terrible. I don't know. We'll find out. But in 2023, when the first one comes out. But what I do know for sure is that it has stretched my mind and my talent in new ways, sometimes uncomfortable ways, sometimes exciting ways. And I know that I'm going to be a better writer on the other end for it, no matter what I write. So don't be afraid to try new things, and know that it's not always about being good at it, whatever that metric for good is you have. It's having the experience and growing. One of the saddest things to me is when I read a writer's work, read their work at like 25, and then I read their work at 40 and it's not changed. And I'm like, what a sad life you lead. Like, it may be textually perfect. All the periods are in the right places or whatever. I don't care, right? Yeah. Because there hasn't been, I think that you can feel through the work when the writer is growing and changing. And that it makes the work feel more intimate and more revolutionary in certain ways. So I would say embrace life and don't be afraid. People told me that once I had the twins and I decided to stay home with the twins for the first 3 years of their lives, people told me, oh, you're a mom now, you'll never write again. And I'm like, you're an idiot. And let me tell you why. First of all, if Lucille Clifton can write after having that many kids and no support, then I'm just going to follow the Lucille Clifton model. If you don't know Lucille Clifton, look her up. Incredible mom and incredible poet.
Yep.
And she talked about being a poet and a mom, which was very inspiring to me. But I think that children, again, it's one of those adventures that changes you, but changes you in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And especially for a world of women, whom we're speaking to right now through Agnes Scott, this idea that you can be a mother and nothing else is very dangerous poison. So don't ever drink the poison. You can absolutely be a mom. Maybe you'll write through motherhood. Maybe you'll take a break. I took a 3-year break the first 3 years my kids were born because I had the privilege of choosing whether or not to be home with them. And I chose to be home with them. And that will be one of the most valuable times of my life. And then, yes, you started writing again, and it might be harder in some ways, but that's okay because it all comes back. So never let the idea that motherhood has to limit you in any way as a writer.
I can only applaud that. I mean, I agree. When I had my daughter, one of the things that was really, really helpful in moving through it was the fact that I did not cut her out of that part of my life. So when I was writing, and that she was getting older, she was 4 or 5, she'd come in and I'd tell her what I was doing. I wouldn't say, oh, you're interrupting me, but I would say, I'm writing, you want to write too? Or she goes, what are you writing? And then I'd start to read and she'd get bored and she'd walk off. But she knew basically that she was being included, that this wasn't something. And therefore she sometimes didn't bother me because she thought, oh, she's doing that stuff again. Okay. Yeah. It really, really, and it showed her, I think, in a way that she was part of that life, that life was important to me and to her. And, so that I don't know. I think it was really, really important.
Absolutely. And I completely agree. And the understanding that like you are doing something important and it may not include them. I found that also helped my kids not bother me. Because when I came in and I showed them what I was doing and we talked about it, for me, I was very lucky. I could take them to the theater and they could walk around the stage. They didn't get to see the shows because those are too scary, but like they could walk around the stage and feel it wasn't just like, oh, mommy's away. It's like, oh, mommy's doing something special.
Right.
And that also helps them understand like how to leave you alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know. I was poet laureate when my daughter was about 10, 11, and every other Thursday, I think it was Thursday, every other Thursday there was a poetry reading that I hosted. So my husband would drive up after she got out of school. He'd drive her up to Washington from Charlottesville. And I told her, look, you can do your homework, you can sit around, you can walk around with the caterers who do the reception afterwards, or you can sit at the reading. You don't have to listen if you don't want to. And so she had a ball. She said she just had a ball. She knew everyone and she would sit there. And then in the end, she actually did come in and listen to the readings. But, this was part of my life that I wanted to let her in on.
I love that.
I'm going to throw another question in the mix.
Okay.
And this is in the chat. How does it feel to know that your work is being studied in classes and helping young writers develop their skills and their own styles? So how does it feel to be the object of study in academia?
Like that's crazy. I didn't even make that good grades in academia.
I still get a shock. I still go, oh, okay, they're doing that. All right, fine. Yeah.
I'm very honored. Yes, it blows my mind and I'm honored. And occasionally, because I work in theater, students will like film their senior projects or whatever when they do my play as senior projects and send them to me. And I'm always so thrilled and I always write them a thank you note. Because at the end of the day, we don't do this for money. There'd be a lot easier ways to make money in a capitalist society, right? We do it because it's a calling, and it's an ancient calling, and it's what separates humans from the animals. When we started, we didn't become humans when we stood upright. A lot of animals stood upright. We became human when we learned to tell stories to each other, to try and understand something beyond instinct survival. When we started to try and understand the world around us and the heavens and what it meant to be here. So being part of that history, which I've always felt very connected to, I'm very honored that my work is passing that along to a new generation.
That was wonderful. It's absolutely, oh, that was wonderful. Yeah.
I'm going to take the privilege to jump on that question and push it a little further. I mean, how about when people say weird stuff about, I mean, you know, what happens to the writing when it gets moved out of the theater or out of the, you know, the workshop that you created the poem in, and gets into the hands of somebody that wants to say something about it that you don't recognize?
Well, you know, my feeling is that, you know, at that point, they've been moved by it in some way. I'm not going to try to correct someone. I've had people, I mean, mistake. I remember a short story of mine where the protagonist was male, and they just didn't get that because, of course, they assumed that the first person protagonist was a woman, although there were many, you know, indications that it was a male. So of course they didn't get the masturbation scene, you know, so what? Okay, but you know, my friends said, just let it go. I mean, the only thing I would say, contrary to that, is if the general consensus has been an interpretation that I didn't intend, then I might look at the piece and say, what did I do that I, you know, not to communicate this thing accurately? You know, that's basically it. But the errant, wild story always kind of amuses me more than distresses me.
Yeah, I agree. It's, you know, one of the things we studied in the workshop we're doing at the Writers Festival with the college students is Fairview. And Fairview is a brilliant play by Jackie Sibley's Drury, which recently won the Pulitzer Prize. You can buy it in any bookshop. And in Fairview, the first act is what you think of is a family drama of a Black upper middle class family figuring that their daughter might be gay. So you might think it's a coming out story. The second act is actually white people commenting on what they think is happening in the story. And then, the second act and the third act is those two worlds collide. And really, it's a play. We watched an interview with Drury, and she talks about how it's really a play to try and point out some of the biases, even in progressive white communities, and how it impacts the Black community. Mm-hmm. And we were watching her interview about it, and she's like, this play has been talked about in all kinds of ways, good, bad, and otherwise. And I thought she said something brilliant on this topic, which is very close to what Ms. Dove said, which is, as long as it has resonated with people and gets them to think and talk about it, then I'm good. It may not always be the exact message or idea that I intended, but what I'm trying to get people to do, and what so much of literature is trying to get people to do, is not to sit, but to stand up, and to stand up and figure out what they need to say and how to say it. And so I thought that was just a beautiful response to that question. Much better than mine, which is that I just usually let it go. Like, unless it's some huge, you know, unless like it's a talk back and I'm there and they ask the question, is this the right interpretation? Mm-hmm. Then I might say, what made that come to you? I'm very curious and interested. But usually I let it go. And but Drury's answer is much better than mine.
Okay, other questions, you all? I know you have them. There's a question I have in chat about, I wonder if they still get writer's block and how do they work around that?
Ooh. Ooh. It depends on what your definition of writer's block is. I've certainly had great swaths of time where I was just writing shit. I mean, really terrible stuff, but I kept writing, just kept writing. That's all you can do, is just to keep writing. The biggest writer's block I had was an actual deliberate one. It happened really, I guess, in the past, I don't know, 6 years ago or something like that, right after my last major book, which was Sonata Melodica, and it was a big, almost like it's a novel in verse, basically. I had immersed myself so deeply in the 19th century in this mixed race violinist and Beethoven and all of that, and I was just totally into it, and it was very difficult to crawl out of that world. Most of the time, I tend to have several pots on the stove, so to speak, so that even if I finished one book, there's always some half books or something hanging around. In that case, I had worked on it for so long that there was nothing around when I came out. And I went into a kind of, it sounds weird, a deliberate writer's block. I kept hearing my own voice coming back at me. People were like responding to what my voice was. And I thought, I don't have a voice. I have a life. And so because I couldn't hear myself in a way for all the publicity, I just went radio silent and didn't publish and just kept it back. My husband was going nuts. He's a writer too. And he kept saying, aren't you going to publish this? I said, no, I need the silence. So it was a kind of deliberate writer's block. But writer's block is real. I mean, I think that what we can do, what we shouldn't do though, what I feel we shouldn't do, is succumb to it and say, oh, and let it crush you. And, it's terrifying to write. It's wonderful to write. Sometimes you're good. Sometimes it's not. Most of the time it's not. But the sheer act of it, I don't know. So I say, even if you have a writer's block, it's like you're an athlete, do your planks, That's all.
I agree. I would say yes. And think of it as mental muscle if we're taking the athlete metaphor, right? Like even if you're writing and it's not coming out well, the fact is you're that runner doing laps. You're building the mental muscle. And at some point, doing the laps turns into being the fastest, but sometimes that takes a long time.
Yeah.
So do the laps. I also have multiple things going on, and I will sometimes move between them. And I find that if I get stuck on one thing, if I move to something that's a different form, that helps me. So like, because I write books, nonfiction, how to write book, how to write plays books. And then I also have a play, and then I also might have an opera or something.
Mm-hmm.
I find that sometimes moving between them helps shake my brain up. Also, when my students get stuck, I recommend going and imbibing a different form of art. Because you still get some kind of inspiration, you get your soul fed, but because it's not in the form you're working in, it sometimes will help free things up.
Mm-hmm.
So going to an art museum, going to a live music show, doing something where you're still engaged in some way on some level with an artistic process, but you don't have the pressure that it has to be your artistic process, sometimes can shake things loose. There's a great essay by Jose Rivera, who is an Oscar-winning screenwriter and an award-winning playwright. And it's called 36 Assumptions About Playwriting. And if you have a chance, he posted it online for free. If you just type in 36 assumptions about playwriting, it'll pop up. But I think it's probably true for a lot of forms of writing. And he says that whenever he gets writer's block, he thinks of it as that he started lying to himself, that there's something not quite true. And so he writes through it, but he writes through it looking for what is the next truth that he's going to put on the page, and that propels him. So that's another approach as well, if that helps.
That's such a fantastic idea. And also the idea, to go to another form of art and immerse yourself in it. It's so good. I mean, we don't start out geniuses. We hope we become geniuses, but we probably don't. But we also don't start out good. We start out with our ABCs. And so to actually jump into another discipline and learn it from the ground up is so cool. I mean, a small anecdote. When was it? 1998, our house burned down, lightning struck it. It was very dramatic. We were in it, but that's all right. We got out of it. And so the house burned down. Now, you don't write after such a thing, and it didn't enter my mind that I was going to write anything. I was pretty stunned. We were busy putting the house together. But because our neighbors wanted to cheer us up, they took us to a dinner dance. I looked up, I saw these people waltzing. I said, I've always wanted to learn how to waltz. And the same wonderful neighbor signed up the whole neighborhood for ballroom dancing. And so we began to dance. Now, this sounds bizarre, and we were horrible at the beginning. There we are, these, middle-aged people trying to do a samba, and we had to learn how to move our muscles, and I did not think about writing at all. And then one day, the first poem came out, right? Because I had immersed myself in another discipline, and suddenly I was engaging my body in my writing as well, which I had backed away from it in an interesting way and didn't realize I had. So, you never know where it's going to come from, but you just got to dedicate yourself to all of the muses, and they'll help you out.
Okay, we have another question in chat. Ivy Marie says, I love to write, but I'm an atrocious performer. As established writers, how do you find your public voice? For Rita Dove, do you just read your poems as you tell them, or is the performance another aspect of the poem?
I am a shy person, a terrifically shy person, actually, who had to learn to speak. And I still remember my first reading really was I was a bread loaf. I was, senior, kind of going into grad school, terrified because I had to give this little reading. And my roommate actually took me, put a pencil in my mouth like this, and said, now read those poems. And I tried to read them. We were cracking up by the end of it. And she says, if you can do that, it's Demosthenes, no pebbles in the mouth, but a pencil in the mouth. She said, just think of the pencil every time you go up there and read. And it really did help. I mean, it suddenly became so much easier to pronounce, just to pronounce the words, just to pronounce the words. And over the years, I've just learned that no one wants to see me nervous. Nobody, we know someone's nervous and you get nervous with them, and then I'm thinking, so no one wants to see that. So even if I am, and even if I'm, it's not about me. It's about, projecting those words to the audience. So I do tell myself that every time, I must say, so.
Awesome.
I guess in Jacqueline, your case, performance is more at the heart of what you do. And so.
Oh yes, but I am not a performer. My mother came, I was a lead actress in one play at Agnes Scott when I was a student. My mother came to see it. Afterwards in the lobby, she met me and she's like, we're not doing this, right? like, no, I had to do it for credit. They made me be on stage. And she's like, okay, it was great. I'm so proud of you. Yay. You said there were words and they came out of your mouth. So I'm not a performer. I have a great deal of respect for performers. But I am not shy. So I've one of the things that I've always been okay with is looking like an idiot in front of people. So I don't know whether that's good or bad, but I think it made probably the reading part of when I have to do these little readings occasionally. I think it probably makes it easier because I'm like, I don't know, it might be good, might be bad, but people have to look at me. So yeah, so that's not been an issue. I will say though, also, there are some acting studios. I have some friends who are actors who have coached fiction writers and nonfiction writers and poets and stuff. So if you want to get technical training, you could probably contact any of the acting studios and see if they have someone who'll do like a couple-hour workshop with you one-on-one. I know a number of the writers, non-theater writers in Philly have actually taken little acting classes that just help them be confident in their performance.
Mhm, mhm.
Okay, another question in chat. Do you have favorite moments from reading other people's works where you felt your eyes were open to something new about how you would go about writing?
All the time. Really all the time. I mean, it's hard to choose and pick and choose. Yeah.
I think most recently I read a beautiful play called Failure, a Love Story. And it's a story theater piece about a group of sisters called the Fail Sisters who all died in weird ways, but lived fully because they embraced life when they were alive. And it is by Philip Dawkins and it's published, you can get it. But like the ability, Dawkins' ability to really delve, I so admire so deeply into something that is so dark and complex, but also make it funny.
Mhm.
And also pull us through those moments with humor and kind of teach us how to live with grief was brilliant. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm learning all the time from my colleagues when I read plays. I think if you probably stop learning, then that's probably not a good sign.
I agree. Down you go. Yeah. When I think about the most recent thing that really opened my mind, it was a book of poems by Victoria Chang called Obit. And what she does in this book is to write nearly every poem is written in the shape of a newspaper obit, that narrow column of text. And written, it always says so and so died, or the blue dress died on so and so a day. So it could be an object, it could be someone's teeth, it could be, but I didn't want to enter the book because I knew from reading the back flap, etc., it was going to deal with grief. And it was going to deal with her parents' death. And both of my parents have died in the last 2 years. So I didn't want to go there. But I'm a poetry professor, so I had to go there. And so I started to read it. And it was, yes, she does go deeper and deeper than I ever thought one could go in terms of all kinds of grief and all the memorabilia that pull up that grief, but she also works through it, all in this narrow space. And then you realize how little obituaries say normally because of the limitation of space. It was a phenomenal book. Yeah, it opened me.
Yeah, as Professor Stammet put in the chat, she was actually here earlier, well, here virtually earlier this semester. And we heard her read from that book.
Yes. Yes. Great.
So we got a question. This is for Jacqueline Goldfinger. Did you ever learn about Frances Catherine Gooch, who founded the Blackfriars Society, and Agnes Scott?
Oh yeah. Yeah, mainly just through the information that's posted on the wall at the theater itself. But there are some great pictures if you dig into the Agnes Scott archives of like, I think it's her, I think it's the original Blackfriars, and they're performing in the old amphitheater before the theater was built. For those of you who don't know, the place on campus where the chapel is now, there used to be a big grass place with concrete. It was like a little amphitheater from ancient Greece. And that's where all the shows used to be before they built the inside theater space. And there are actually pictures of the original Blackfriars, and the female students played all the roles, male, female, you know, pixies, everything. And it's awesome and empowering to see pictures of these women from the early 1900s already like embodying these male roles. So yes, we learned about her. And also check out the theater archives, because some of those pictures are just phenomenal. Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. And this is a very open-ended one in chat. When was the last time you surprised yourself, either in your own writing or in your life?
Writing or life?
I think we've stumped them. This is amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a great question.
It is a great question. It's a great question. I'm going to be thinking about this for days now. Wow.
I was trying to think of what I wrote recently.
Me too. I was thinking,
right? Like I'm going back through it. I'm like, no, I knew that scene was going to happen.
Yeah, right. You know.
But what I did have, I did recently in the piece I'm working on now, I've been commissioned to write a piece on M.I. Phillips, who is an early American painter who's a folk artist. And it's a piece that's going to be performed in museum and installation spaces. So it'll be cool because you can like go see the exhibit of his work and then like see a short piece about his life. And one of the things that I found out, and of course this is as much me as it is M.I. Phillips' work, is that the people who were really interested in talking about him were his three sisters. So the play, I expected like M.I. to be the central character, and he's there, but you get to see different aspects of his personality from his relationship with his three sisters, who actually were like historical figures. And so sometimes people in theater, like in plays, they just show the fuck up. They're like, I'm here, write my story. If you don't write my story, I will haunt you forever and ever. So like there's sometimes that characters just knock on the doors. And for sure, those three characters knocked on the door very loudly. And one of the things that I tell students is to be open, because the first draft of a play is for you. That's for you to put in everything you think and all of your intellectual ideas and everything in the kitchen sink, throw in that first draft. But starting with draft 2 and moving forward, that is for your characters. And that is where you have to step back and really look at the piece and say what characters are speaking, what characters are beating at the door, and then honor the stories they need to tell. So I recently had the experience where I thought a play was one thing, and then at the middle of the play, the three sisters knocked on the door of the first draft, and now the second draft focuses on the sisters and their relationship with AMI. And I have to honor their story, because if I'm not honoring their story, then what's the point of showing up? Right.
Yeah.
So that's probably my most recent.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I always think if I'm not going to be surprised, and perhaps that's why it stumped me, then I'm doing something wrong. If I don't get surprised while I'm writing, then something's wrong. I think one of the things, though, that one of the most recent surprises is that I have a hard time doing things on commission in terms of if it's going to be a poem, not if it's going to be if it's going to be a piece of prose or description. Of course, you can do that. But recently I did a song cycle with the composer Richard Daniel Poor, and the idea was that it was going to be 12 poems, maybe a prologue, maybe an epilogue, but they basically covered the last 60 so years of American history, a little chunk or something. So it was charted in a way because we had to choose events and to sing about in that sense. And that was difficult. The hardest thing about it was that I worked like all over the place. And so I would send him number 4 and number 9 of the piece. And he'd say, I can't do this. I need the beginning. I have to, because I'm the musician, I have to do this art. So I had to actually start at the beginning. And that was very hard for me. And I kept thinking, I can't do this. But then I thought, yeah, you can do this. And because he needs that. And so that surprised me. And then when we were finished, and I knew the singer, I knew Susan Graham was going to sing it. I could hear her voice in my head. And I thought this was all finished. And then came the election. And then came all of this. And Susan came back and said, we need another poem. And I'm like, oh, no, I had shut that door. I was ready to move on. And I thought I couldn't do it. It surprised me. But then I thought, yeah, you can do this. And so I did. And it was actually easier than I thought. It has to do with what you said, Jackie. You have to open yourself again. You have to open yourself. And it's a scary thing. It is, we're all fragile inside, but when you open and stuff comes in, wow. Yeah, so I had to reopen myself.
Well, thank you for the wonderful answers to that question and to the whole thing. I think it was really an exhilarating ride, at least it was for me. So let's everybody give a big virtual round of applause for our guests. And at 8 p.m. tonight, Rita Dove's reading. Tomorrow, 5 p.m., Jacqueline Goldfinger is giving her keynote. So you won't want to miss that. Thank you.
We'll see you all back here at 4 o'clock for the roundtable of former Writers Festival guests. Thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to share my screen one more time so you can see our very long list of people to thank, but no one more than our distinguished returning guests. Have a great afternoon. Well, couple of hours.